Today we've got a lovely team making this happen. Jim Moran is our collections officer and master printer, and today cameraman. Dan, oh, there he is. And then Dan Rhatigan, who I'll do just a short introduction. He's been hanging here all week at Hamilton, going through collections and exploring. So Dan is a Hamilton board member, which is so exciting. He's also a type designer, and he's going to talk about his hunt for inspiration during the past week. He does not normally live in Two Rivers, so it's a treat for us to have him here, and I think it's a treat for him to be here.
It sure is.
He's going to show some of the wood type he's been looking at, how it's influencing some of his digital typefaces he's been working on lately. If you haven't been following along, please check out our Instagram. There's a link in the chat. He's been doing a gram takeover, and he posts a lot more than I do, so you get all the behind the scenes. Dan has over 25 years of eclectic experience in various industries. He's been a typesetter, graphic designer, typeface designer, educator. This includes time in both London and New York, serving as type director for Monotype and senior manager of Adobe Type. He has an outstanding collection of letter set. He makes amazing zines, and he sports the best type tattoos around. Yep, right there. So he's going to tell us more about his current work, a digital type foundry called Bijou Type. And here at Hamilton, we absolutely love working with you, Dan. We like to hang out, we like to work on ways use, we like to dig through archives. So thank you so much for sharing today, and we're glad you're here.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Let me pop over to my slides and we can start to rock. I left my last job at Adobe back in February because I wanted to start spending some time concentrating on my own curiosity about typefaces that I wanted to tackle. And so, although I've not released anything yet, I'm starting up a little foundry called Bijou Type, which is giving me this space to sort of follow my curiosity about a variety of things. And it's been really fun to finally jump back into my own typographic interests and figuring out what to do. And I have been starting out a project that I've been calling the Ringgold Series, which is grown out of a lot of research I've been doing the last 2 years about sort of the typographical history in magazines. In particular, I've been looking at the development of type as it's been used in magazines pitched to the gay market, from the early days where they could not be overtly pitched to the gay market to sort of a real explosion of publishing in the gay community in the 70s. And to get to that spot, I've been collecting a lot of things and looking at a lot of it and seeing a lot of typefaces that showed up quite often in a bunch of titles. The first one that really caught my eye is this one, seen here in a few examples of not just the magazines that I've been collecting, but in some novels that I've come across. And part of what all this research I've been doing has made clear is that in the period that I've been looking at, a lot of the typography was done with letter set, especially the display typography, because it was cheap and it was accessible and it allowed for like a variety of sort of very off the cuff and fun type choices, which worked well in this kind of publishing. But the nature of letter set in allowing you to, you're setting letter by letter, it's always a manual process. When you have a really dense display typeface like this, it's easy to just, as you go along, deal with all the spacing issues, really set it that tight, not touching, or in some cases, definitely touching, like in this banner for Drummer magazine. And in trying to do some recreations of these for a zine project a couple of years ago, I was identifying typefaces and tracking down the digital versions. I saw that the digital version of this typeface, I'd been seeing a lot of Egyptian bold condensed. The digital version was sort of a pale shadow of the original. And even the letter set version, which I saw very often, is itself a revival of 19th century wood type. So I started looking back through sort of how that had evolved over the years. And what I wanted to do was a digital version of that same style, where I wanted to get rid of all the things that I didn't like in this design and switch to what I liked about it. Like, I actually didn't really love the softness of the ball terminals in, say, the J's, and you see in a lot of the lowercase and then the numbers. So I wanted to certainly redesign all the numbers, redesign a few characters. I didn't love the softness that comes from some of the density of the shapes. So I actually wanted to make the overall appearance a little bit heavier and crisper and carve out some bigger counters. So I had a real sense of what I wanted this to be. And I began drawing that from scratch, looking at a variety of source material, spacing it so that it could naturally be very, very tight. And before long, I realized that what would also be interesting is to take a look at a bunch of other magazines in the collection, and I was looking at sort of some trends in typography in all these, and realized that there were a lot of commonalities in the way these things fit. They had kind of, a lot of them really favored these dark, dense, fairly compact typefaces. So this led to an idea of building out a family for this one style that was not about different weights of one design, but what are different styles that you can group together with this similar feel, a similar like density, so that they kind of have this conversation with one another rather than falling in this spectrum along one style. So that has led to the Ringgold series, which is, I've looked at a bunch of typefaces that had been used over the years and tried to work with the style cues of how they're all joined, and investigate the way some of the features changed structurally as you go from one style to another, but design everything so that they could feel very crisp and contemporary, but have echoes of some of these older typefaces that, so there's a little bit of like nod to nostalgia and history and typographic heritage, but the overall feel is dense, all caps display type for contemporary publishing. And you can kind of see in this sample, and some of these are more resolved than others at this point, but I'm trying to get them to kind of land on the page with a similar impact, but then worry about these sort of shifts in style and structure to change the overall tone of how those get used. And since this is building out of and styles that came from 19th century wood type, I'm trying to sort of hold the line where the Sans version is kind of a 19th century grotesque in its overall feel. Rather than going for sort of like a regular collegiate varsity style Sans, I'm sticking to this very solid slabby style for the chamfered font. And that's been really fun so far. But with the seed of this idea about what does a series look like for a project like this, of course, it can go off in all directions. Here's an example of, the varying degrees to which detailing or structures would change in ways that made sense for the shape language for each one of these styles. The H's stay pretty close. It becomes a little bit more of a manipulation of these internal shapes, or say the height of these slabs. The A begins to change a little bit in some ways, but when you get to other characters like the R's or the Q's, you get to some real structural changes in order to get a feeling that seems consistent with the overall direction of each one of these styles. And that's been really fun to play with. And I'm in the middle of trying to work out how to get the new numbers that I designed can do this in the same logical way. And I'm not showing them because they are not there yet. I am just trying to crack this problem. And because I know that I'm going with an all caps design, I'm trying to put my ambition into expanding the character set and language support for these past anything in the original sources. So lots of accents to support different languages. I've been developing Cyrillic and Greek to go with all of these. So, I'm drawing from these seeds that I've seen out there, and then I'm trying to reinvent them from scratch based on my own sensibilities about what I want in a sort of a display typeface for modern publishing. And then I'm just trying to push the boundaries to make them useful for a broader group of people. But then there's the question of like, so I've done a lot and thought about at least these 4 styles, but this idea of working with a similar structure and shifting the tone through the personality brings up some interesting possibilities. So I started to take a look at other wood type styles that may work for this, and some of them don't really fit. Tuscan styles are a little bit too fussy. They don't have as modern a feel. There are a lot of versions in grotesques, but I think I have one direction down, so I'm trying to lean into that. So one of the things I wanted to do with the Hamilton this week is actually take a look at what they had lurking in the drawers here, and try to get a little bit of inspiration of other options to consider. And then of course, look at the examples about like what those structural features had to get me thinking about how they could apply. So if we can switch over now to my favorite cameraman, Jim Moran, we can take a look at some of what I've been doing here in the museum for the last week. Is the live feed going now?
The live feed is going and we can
That's
see
awesome.
you.
Okay, so I, early in the week when I got here, I spent a lot of time here in the staff press room where the good chunk of the type is stored, hunting through all the drawers for stuff that I wasn't familiar with. Or if I had seen it, I hadn't taken a close look at to look for some options that were possible. So one of the first things that I came across were a variety of styles labeled Grecian in all the old specimen books. And this is sort of like a softer version of that chamfered style that I was playing around with in the Jim version of Ringgold. And that was an interesting possibility. Like the Jim style that I drew already is kind of a very hefty and aggressive style, but the Grecians have a sort of there's more contrast. Those chamfered edges are a little bit more delicate, and you do eke a different personality of it, which is exactly what I'm trying to do in the family, is to shift the personality bit by bit from style to style. And there were a lot of versions of these around the museum that I'm guessing had come from a variety of sources. Hamilton had made some. I'd found some examples in and this is Rob Roy Kelly's book. You see a couple of different widths of the Grecian style. So I made a proof of this alphabet that I found here in the Hamilton this week, so I could just take a closer look at what the real wood type looks like and bring this home with me. And that's giving me quite a bit to chew on, because I like this version that is a little bit somewhere between the antique and the Jim styles and what I've been doing. So it hits sort of a sweet spot between the two. And it gives me a lot to think about how these stylistic cues will be able to apply to this overall proportion and weight that I've been working out for my own project. Now, another style that I came across, and this is in a collection of type that came from a printer named Chuck Wendell. This is just labeled Scheffer, and it is kind of like condensed, lighter weight Cooper black, say, in its overall styling. You can see in the type here that it's pretty round in all the details. It's got a similar proportion to the fonts that I've been looking at, which made me think, is like, okay, so this could apply if I manipulate the weight. And I again proofed this so I could take a better look at it, because I haven't quite come across this style in the references that I had on hand. Of course, part of the fun of coming to a place like the Hamilton and looking through the drawers of type is hoping to find a full character set, which you don't see in specimen books. And I didn't get quite lucky with this, because what we have in the drawer from Chuck is missing the K, and it's missing a couple of the numbers. But again, it gives me something to chew on in terms of what can a softer version of this look like in this family. In a way, for the family that I'm doing, I didn't want to do just a rounded sans, because there are a lot of those out, but I mean, even in this moment in time, this is kind of an interesting direction to explore to fit within this family that I'm working on. Like, what does a very rounded and soft version look like with the same basic skeletons that I've been designing around so far. And so that was really cool. So these are the two things I've come across that seemed most promising. And where there were full alphabets. Scattered around some of the drawers here in the room, I found a handful of letters of things that had some interesting ideas, but I didn't kind of want to go to the effort of pulling them out and cleaning them and locking them up and printing if they weren't actually going to turn out to be great references for things. The other part of what I really wanted to do while I was here this week is look for buried treasure, things that I'd not seen any versions of, or if I'd seen them, I'd only seen a few before. And this goes back to what I was doing the last time that I was able to sneak up to the Hamilton for a week. That was about almost 3 years ago I came here. And then looking around the museum then, I was paying a lot of attention to the type that had been sort of cleaned up and put out in display cases around the museum. And this baby really caught my eye. So this is William Page's Mexican design, a chromatic typeface, just absolutely bonkers and vivacious and vibrant shapes and details. And I mean, if you're taking a good look at what we're seeing on the screen, you can kind of get the appeal about how lush all of this is. So that caught my attention, and particularly because seeing that we had a case that was filled with the full character set, including some basic punctuation, which is much more than what was available in the full color Page specimen book. So I had seen this in the reprint before. Quick shout out to the publisher in case anyone wants to pull up this wonderful reprint gathered by Esther Smith. But there are only 3 characters of the Mexican in here, which did not do more than hint at the kind of wondrous shapes that are available in the full design. So they very kindly let me pull all of this type out of a case and lock up a form and proof it. Steph, if you could switch over to sharing those proofs that I printed on the last visit.
Will do.
So at that time, I ran a two-color chromatic proof of this. I printed on light blue paper to give it a letracetti feel, since a lot of this ties back to that same kind of display type that I was looking at. And I am a novice printer, so this took quite a bit of time and plenty of guidance from Jim and Stephanie to do this, but I at least was able to capture what I wanted to see about what the typeface looked like. But then I also proofed the 2 layers separately in all black. If you go to the next page, in order to give me 2 layers that I could then scan and think about tracing and digitizing. And once I started looking at this and doing some basic digital drawings of these letters, I realized that this is a longer term project. This is going to be pretty complex, not just to digitize and wrangle into like a little bit more coherent shapes, but it's quite a challenge to think about having to design numbers and other symbols and punctuation that don't exist in there. So this is something that just sort of exists in the background, and every once in a while I draw a few things to try to get this over, to get this into some kind of shape, so that someday I hope this becomes a typeface. But it's an example of one of the things that I love about coming to a place like the Hamilton that has so much type, that it's often a much richer experience than hunting through old books for it, because when you've got all the type, you've got all the characters in most senses. So this week, while hunting around for buried treasure, I came across in a drawer another typeface that I had not seen very much of. Again, this turned out to be a William Page typeface. So this is the type that I found in a drawer here in the press room, and I actually loved the sort of like the contemporary feel of it. It was very crisp. It's kind of doing some things of like some Tuscan grotesque styles that I'd seen, but it's a little bit sharper, not as fussy. And hunting around, I did find an example of this in Rob Roy Kelly's book, once again. But the really amazing thing about coming to the Hamilton to do this is there's a little note here at the bottom of the page for this 1887 typeface, only noted as number 154, is that the lowercase are missing. Well, the lowercase is not missing because in this collection, we have all the lowercase letters lurking in a drawer here. Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this was part of the material that came through Columbia College to Hamilton?
This one was always here. This one did not come from Columbia.
Okay.
So it was merely there the day I started.
Okay. So Jim, if you can't hear it, Jim points out that this design from Page didn't come in with the other material from Columbia College that became part of the Hamilton's collection. It was always here, and it was here before he started working with the collection years ago. So this is a little bit of lost treasure that has been lurking here in the museum's collection. So this I had to prove and take a closer look at. So I put that on press and went to it yesterday. And it was nice in doing this while printing to see that this is a lot crisper at the edges than what's reproduced in Rob Roy Kelly's book. It has a little bit of softness, but you see more what I think is the core idea of you have these concave strokes, convex or concave, depending on which way you're looking at it, but meeting at these very, very crisp edges to get the same kind of solid setting. And I think this may be like the wrong kind of structural elements to integrate into something like my Ringgold series, but there's something here that I think has some real meat for exploration for actually building out a multi-weight family, which I may like to take a crack at. And again, having the lowercase is really interesting in this, and you can see how the idea carries out in a bunch of other letters. Again, because when you look through the drawers of wood type to see what's available, a couple of mysteries invariably become part of the process, whether it's missing characters or other things. So there's this mysterious character that when I first looked at the type, I thought it was just a pound sign. But of course, looking at it printed right way, it's not quite a pound sterling sign. And I'm not entirely sure what it's supposed to be. And there was no lowercase z in the alphabet, but there was an alternate S that had more of a Z-like styling. So I popped that on there so that I could have a proof, and that's something to chew over about what an alternate version could be. But overall, this kind of experience is what I love about getting some time to dig into what's here. It can be a little bit richer and raise more questions than just looking at things in old books, because there's just the process of wrangling with the type and setting it, which reveals some things about the design. But then you get into that possible serendipity of what is hidden in there that may be a little bit murkier than what a printer or a foundry had decided to present in a very nice way in one of the specimen books.
And there are two questions. Do you mind if I interrupt and ask those now?
No, absolutely. I'm actually going to go back over to my laptop with my camera.
Okay, I will add spotlight and
yeah.
Okay, so the two, Carl Middleton said you've got a French 2 on your hands with that interesting character.
A French 2, that's amazing. Thank you. I love it. This is exactly why it's also fun to show this to other people who really know the background of all this.
And then you or Jim could even speak maybe a little bit more about that lockup. There was a question about some of them are printing solid and some are printing salty. And we could even show it again, but he was asking about, is it type height or surface? And we're
Yeah.
not looking at it right now, so.
Jim, could you bring the camera back over to that lockup? There are some questions about whether this was, how this is printing. I found, so I am not a master printer like Jim or Ann, but I found when printing these blocks, so these blocks were definitely in sort of a variety of conditions. Some of the letters were pretty clean and smooth. I had to clean off a few of the characters that hadn't been touched. So there were a couple that had murky surfaces, but even when I started printing, although it's all type high, you can see from the impression it was getting that there's some slight variation in there. And if, since I was just proofing, I didn't want to get into the whole process of trying to make small adjustments by sliding some paper underneath all the letters. I lifted the L up. The L in particular was coming out very light, so I popped a Post-it note, which was just about the size of that block under there, to lift that up a little bit. If I were more ambitious about the printed results, I would probably want to do something similar in a few places to get a more consistent level across this. But for the sake of what I was doing, I just tried to slap as much ink onto those as they could hold reasonably well. And I put 2 pieces of paper through to get some extra cushioning on that going through.
Thank you. I appreciate you going over that.
And was that the second question?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Actually, I see some good feedback from John Danner about the Jim style, which is actually a totally good comment. Jim is saying is that the S needs some serifs and matching it to the G. That's exactly the kind of stuff that I'm wrangling with in these designs. The Jim is even less resolved than the Sans. I've done less work on it. So it's sitting in a position where I wasn't entirely sure about whether to nudge it more towards like that sort of regular Sansy chamfered style or hang on to the slabs. As I see it more, John, you're right. It's the sans-like elements are the ones that are not working. So I have to go back in and do some more exploration to get them to push it more towards the slab style. This is the terrifying part about showing things that are in process, because it reveals all my indecision before I can make a confident stance.
As a non-type designer, I have to say it's very exciting to see because I find the process so interesting. And then also seeing how Hamilton's pieces could also inspire and influence it is great. So thank you. I appreciate you for sharing that, because I'm sure it'd be a little tough.
Well, and for me, like for my sensibilities, you know, the joy of starting up my own foundry is I can take the direction that I'm interested in these, rather than say when I'm doing custom type or doing library projects for someone else, is I can do the translation of these details or these structures that I find, because I love the feel and the look of wood type. I'm less interested in doing very close revivals, because I want to sort of tease out the personality that I like of those and find ways to make them feel contemporary. And turn them into typefaces that I want to use for design projects that I do now. So it's nice having a little time to play around with this much material, where I can compare and contrast, you know, a variety of things and try to synthesize some of that. Like the fact that I've come across about 5 similar Grecian designs, for instance, is giving me some, you know, a bit to chew on about like what is in that general genre that that might apply to what I want to do. And the wood type versions of those still feel a little old fashioned, but there's something there that I want to tease out and play with and see if I can get it to feel sort of sharp and dense like the other styles that I'm working on.
And there's a good question from Carl. He asked, are the slab serifs common in the USA? In the UK, they were always the cheapest, or typefaces, so stop.
I'm actually, so I'm gonna pose that to Jim.
Yeah.
Jim, were slab serifs and wood face pretty common here in the States? In the UK, they were often seen as the cheaper things.
That's interesting to me.
Uh-huh.
I think that um, is something of a loudness, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm actually turning on the mic of the laptop so we can hear Jim if he wants to say anything.
Well,
Hey everybody, it's Jim Moran.
Hi. You know, it almost strikes me a little bit of that American loudness, right? We need to talk louder than all of the other people in the room, and so the face almost seems to need to reflect it. But that's more theory than anything based on information that I've got.
Yeah. I mean, my impression from looking at a lot of different styles that are here in the collection is that there were a lot of variations of the slab style. It's kind of like the treatment of a lot of the grotesques as well. It's just an element of the formula, and then variations appear around it depending on how the patterns get cut.
And when you think about that era when Page was competing with Morgan's Wilcox, who was competing with Heber Wells, who was competing with Tubbs, who was competing with Hamilton, they would make the same font with variations.
Yeah.
And in some cases that was merely so that it was ours, you know, and perhaps you could steal it that way as well. It's not your Clarendon, that's actually mine.
Yeah. I mean, that's also what's fun about looking through drawers at a place like this, where they've come from a variety of sources over the years, instead of a single specimen book. Like say those variations of the Grecian style that I was talking about, and certainly the variations in the grotesques. You see a lot of things sort of circulating around the same center, and ending up with different results in the end.
Yeah, the only time I have a difficulty with that is, for example, that font that you showed from Chuck Wendell, where that's actually like a 16.5 line piece of type. And I wish they would have just stuck with a solid round number at least.
I guess I suppose that's the way of locking people into your product, is if the size is less interchangeable.
Yes. Yeah. It's just harder to get furniture and reglets, I'm sure.
I like having Jim join in the discussion, but we're so backlit standing over there. I'm going to swing back to this position. Jim, you can come over here if you want.
All right.
I've certainly, while I've been here this week, I've been talking with Jim about a lot of the stuff that I've been seeing. So it's certainly part of the hang to have him be part of all this. But what I was sort of saying about like, what's interesting to me as a designer trying to make modern typefaces out of this is the more that I see these minor variations of all these styles, that makes me feel a lot more free to actually pursue it in my own direction and adapt it for the sensibilities I have for work that I'm doing today. It's harder because I have to fill in gaps and a little bit more confidently than I might have to worry about if I was doing a regular adaptation. But there's a lot of freedom in that too that I like. I'm going to curse that freedom when I have to design numbers for the Page Mexican, a design which I also have to come up with a better name for, because I do not feel like in good conscience that I can release a design called Mexican, because I'm just a middle-class Irish kid from New York, and that doesn't seem cool.
That does remind me of a story, though.
Uh-oh.
When Nick Sherman had designed the typeface for Norb Brilski, they got together to make the patterns. And when they were looking over the drawings, Norb would say to Nick, you know, the crossbar on that A should be in the middle, not a little high. And he began to make these sort of aesthetic changes that were not based on the design at all, but in Norb's desire to make it an easy face for himself to cut. And so at one point, Norb wanders off, and you have to remember that in those days, Norb was rather deaf. So being on the other side of the museum, I knew he couldn't hear us when I said to Nick, he kind of changed your design a little. And he said, well, the drawings are kind of useless right now because I got to change everything for Norb. So Norb wanders back. And as though he had actually heard that whole conversation, he says, you know, I changed that Matthew Carter's design too, so it's no big deal. But it brings to mind this idea that you design a font, and let's say we were doing this 125 years ago, it could be that the type cutter said, yeah, I'm just going to change it a little bit here. So for you to make changes on it, I think is only right.
Yeah. And there, I mean, even if I were doing a more slavish revival from a wood type source, there would be a lot of things that I would want to do just because if it's not being made to be printed as wood, I would feel irresponsible not making a few optical adjustments here and there. You don't find a lot of overshoots for your O's and other curved shapes when they're cut into wood blocks because they're just maximizing the space against that hard border.
Right.
And, you know, that when you, that gives it part of its eccentric charm when you look at the proofs, but it does make it a little bit less useful unless you want it to look like old-fashioned wood type.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a lot of the things that I grapple with is that's like, you know, turning the crank on a can opener, a big can of worms. You know, where I've got to with these styles that I've been dealing with so far is, you know, I work for a little while and I put them away for a few weeks. And invariably when I come back after a couple of weeks, I'm like, you know what? I do need to redesign that letter from scratch because it needs to be what I think it should be. It's, you know, it's a process of being a little bit hesitant about changing the precedent that's there, but really having a time out to sit with myself and be like, well, all I want to do is refer to it. I don't want to replicate it because why replicate something that's already there? It's there.
Yep, yep.
We have a good question from Ray Nichols. He wants to know if you will explain and talk about overshoots for a bit.
Sure. Let me actually share my screen again and zoom in on some stuff. So interestingly, overshoots are one of the first things that I learned about graphic design when I was 16 years old and I had an internship at a little graphic services office and I was laying down letraset. So the idea of overshoots is that if you want a round shape to look like it's sitting on the same level as a horizontal line, it actually needs to extend a little bit further. Or if you have a very angular shape, like a pointy top to an A or an M, it has to go a little bit higher so that optically it feels like it's sitting on the same level. So I'm going to nudge down the word top so that the flats are sitting right on the bottom of the screen. The O gets cut off a little bit. It's actually extending a few units past the level at the bottom of those letters. But if you just look at it, it feels right. Jim's brought over a couple of wood blocks to see, so that that page design that I've been looking at kind of addresses this issue about how you can't have overshoots in wood type by having very aggressively flat tops, even on round characters like the O. And that's like a totally valid direction to go in for how do you want to address this optical requirement. In digital type, where we don't have this kind of physical constraint, unless it's a very specific circumstance you're designing for, you worry more about the optical effects, for particularly what's going to happen when you send a typeface out into the world and other people will start using it. When I teach, I've been, for the last few years, I'm doing in particular like a summer short course at the School of Visual Arts for graphic designers who want to try a hand at designing some type. I make the point over and over again that, in my view, the secret to type design is always that it's about the cheating. You're learning to manipulate all the cheats you have to do to get things to look and feel okay. So you sort of start with some basic rules and patterns, and then you have to really look in a very open way about what actually needs to be adapted to get it to feel the way you intend. Like Jim and I were talking earlier in the week about, I don't have a proof in hand, but with numbers, the numbers we use didn't come from the Latin writing tradition. They came through another vector, and they've been wrangled to exist more peacefully with the letters that we use. And that's just a lot of cheating. But when you try to draw them, sometimes it's like, it doesn't quite make sense for weight to show up here. I know a lot of type designers curse the number 4 because you kind of have to cheat with every stroke to get it, the weight to feel like it sits with other things, depending on the design. So that's type design is a cheater's profession. That's my punchy hot take that would surely create outrage on Twitter.
We'll help pass that along. Aaron has some good questions about overshoots.
Aaron mentions that this is a part of sign painting, right? I think I missed John Danner's quote saying that, but Jim brought over an example pointing out how that happens a lot in hand lettering and sign painting. Mm-hmm. John, you're welcome to actually unmute if you want to add something there. We're just hanging out. This isn't a lecture.
Okay, Dan, I'll take you up on your offer. That's a pretty nice little show card. No, I didn't letter it, but I thoroughly approve. Look at the swashes in that capital script P. Okay, it's not even really a script P, but you can dissect the letter and see the beauty of each of those 4 strokes. And the thank you at the bottom was done with a speedball pen, and everything above it was brush lettered. So that's a real keepsake you're holding.
Yeah.
So back to Overshoot. Yes, indeed, some of the pointed letters, like the apex of the A, do go above the cap line in some designs, but sign painters in the middle of the 20th. Oh yeah, that's a photocopy. Oh, no, that's actually my brush lettering, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So I have in my collection 24 pica and 30 pica sorts of each of those characters cut out of HDU by Denver Hall. And I've had those characters up at the Hamilton, and next time I visit, I will bring the boxes of the 24 point and 30 point, and we can do some proofing. How does that sound?
That sounds fun.
Okay.
I do enjoy the fact that as we talk about things, Jim is able to just grab something lying around the press room as a perfect example. And which is, it's another sort of reason like why I love coming here for research and inspiration is there is so much stuff here.
Yeah, well, Jim is not just a capable printer. He's a remarkable archivist.
Yeah.
Okay, carry on.
Yeah. But actually, I'm really glad that you're able to speak to a little bit about where this comes in the sign painting. But what's great about this is that the way that these alignment lines are sketched out on this drawing is you can see exactly what the overshoots are doing on all those letters compared to that alignment where it's hitting the 5, but you pull away and you get the effect that it just makes everything feel like it's all aligned properly.
Indeed. And while you're there, Dan, you should research some of the large sans serif numerals like that, and you will see that in the collection there are these sign painters figures that like match the 3 you just showed with the rounded corners.
Yeah, I've seen those coming from the Globe collection. Jim's just disappeared down a corridor, so I have a feeling one of those is about to emerge soon.
Wonderful.
But it's what's valuable about being in a place that's got a collection about this, and like why I make the effort to come out to Two Rivers and stay for a little while is because over the course of a few days I can sort of digest these things and actually go back and find some material for reference or inspiration. I mean, no, not too much disrespect for Two Rivers. I don't come here for the food. I come here for the wide variety of fun things to look at here in the museum. And it always kind of blows my mind a little bit. It's sort of how much variation there is. And, you know, like I was saying before, I think a lot of the type that you find here does feel like it is of a certain time, sometimes of a certain place, but it's got a lot of information and sort of seeds to germinate other ideas for things that people want to work on in our time and place.
Yeah.
That's my pitch as a board member for the Value of the Hamilton Museum. Everyone, please come and become a member and come visit Two Rivers now that we're open again.
And I'm putting very helpful links over in the chat. So thank you, Dan.
Yeah. Let's see. Let me scroll back to the chat. Have there been any other good questions that have come up? Hans says we should have stuck with Roman numerals. Well, you know, there's some. They're a lot easier to draw. I'll certainly give you that. Except for the Roman numeral 5s. I don't like a diagonal if I can avoid it.
Dan, I have a question.
Sure.
I know you're designing these for the digital font realm. Do you plan to cut them out of wood or anything later?
No, that is not my plan, because actually, you know, similar to what Jim was saying about Norb having some feedback on how things were cut, knowing that I was looking at things that may have emerged in wood type, I was making conscious decisions about what I wanted to refine, thinking about like, there's no way this would be easy to cut in wood. You know, I made a lot of very, very small optical adjustments in a bunch of places in ways that may not be immediately obvious. Let me go back to this for a second. It's a very, very small detail. But again, it gets the feel right in what I've been calling the slab version, the one that has these bracketed contours. And I carried this over into the antique a little bit for consistency, but not the gym. So the bottom serifs, those slabs, that's a little bit thicker than at the top. They're just a few units taller because that making them feel a little bit bottom heavy grounds it a little bit more in a way that works for display type in a way that I wouldn't want to do in text. But, you know, a 10 unit difference in stroke width would really make a type cutter nuts if they're trying to prepare it. And I was really refining a lot of these internal details. You know, I was very much trying to design the black and the white at the same time, or the white and the black, since we're looking at it in reverse here. But I wanted to get these counter shapes to be very, very beautiful in a way that would be maddening to try to carve out. It would be one thing to use a pantograph to guide for the outer contours, but these internal bits would be very, very challenging to try to get much consistency to if you were cutting it. I do have some fledgling ideas of what I would want, what I want to design for something that could be cut out of wood if I'm ever tapped for that honor. But that's one where I would really want to try to design something that is really speaks to the medium and the process and how to take advantage of the peculiarities of that, which I think has actually been like some of the cool things that, like, you know, have done for some of the legacy type projects. Those were designed to be wood type and take advantage of the quirks of that process.
Thank you. That's fascinating.
And there are a couple of good questions in the chat, but before we miss a couple earlier ones, I'm going to ask those.
Yeah, sure.
It was asked, did Metal Type have overshoots, or was it a digital type design development? And we know it happens in sign painting too. So
Metal Type had overshoots. In the Metal Type was more often cut with a little bit more of a body around the letters often than wood type was. Wood type was sort of cut to such of a scale that they were trying to maximize the surface area a lot of the time in most of the designs, which led to that. But a lot of times with the Metal Type, at least a lot of the Metal Type that I've taken the closest look at, which is Monotype and Linotype Metal Type, because I had access to the pattern drawings when I worked at Monotype. The overall M space was generally taking into account that the overshoots were needed. So you would see that the flat details wouldn't hit the edge of the body, but the round ones would. Jim has brought up some metal type. I have no idea how my laptop camera is gonna reflect that. But these are both letters that have overshoots. So you see that the body is hitting the edge of the overshoot letters. But generally there's some flat space built in for ascenders and descenders, which would give room around the flat details.
Wonderful, thank you. And when you are designing, how well does squinting your eyes help with counter spaces and overshooting?
It helps a lot, quite a bit. And I think I really found that to be one of this part of like the slow learning curve of type design, is training your eyes to see that stuff. You kind of make assumptions about that's how it works. When you work with typefaces where those details have already been resolved, when you have to make the decisions yourself about how to resolve them, you find out how much you were assuming versus how much has to be executed. And it takes a little while. Like I'm better at it after doing it for years than I was when I went off to start working on my first typeface.
And that was great, that metal type, seeing it next to the M and the R, you can definitely see the overshoots on that A and that O. So thank you, that was great.
Jim's great. He's a great magician's assistant here in the press room.
It's like he knows where everything is in the museum. It's crazy.
Exactly.
So well, there was one question, because we have Mark from Ireland here, and he said, you said you were Irish and you're looking at Mexican. Have you ever designed an Irish typeface?
I have not. I'm Irish American. So I think for most people in Ireland, I'm Irishy, perhaps. But the point being, I am absolutely not Mexican. I've looked at a lot of Irish typefaces to try to sort of wrap my head around a bit more of the sort of the peculiarities of their own tradition. I haven't really dived into designing any of it, though. I can't say that I'm super familiar.
Thank you. Ian says, for the detail in the second layer of the Mexican face, how would they have cut the detail into the wood? Can that be done on a pantograph?
Do you think the Mexican was stamped rather than cut with the pantograph, Jim? I think it's particularly talking about the detail layer at the top.
It certainly looks stamped.
So you can see that there's such, I was wondering if stamping was the way done, because there's such consistency to this inline that it's through here. It would have been real drudge work to try to carve out all of this by hand. But certainly the clarity of that inline makes me think someone didn't do it by hand.
There are trim marks on that.
There are trim marks, as Jim says, on the bottom color layer. This seems like it could be done a little bit more easily with someone with some skill running a pantograph. But yeah, even looking at the shoulders on these two blocks, and I don't know how well this comes up on camera. This has a really clean. That's not the shoulder. I forget what the side part is called. Is that the beard?
Yeah.
But basically, the sides feel really vertical and crisp on here, and they've got a little bit more of a slant with some trim marks here in the background layer.
Was that a 2-color chromatic or 3? Because in the page book, it looked like they used 3 colors.
This is a 2-color chromatic, but if you look at these two styles, it's assuming that parts of this are going to be overprinted by parts of this. So you effectively get some mixing out of it.
Okay, some 3-color. Okay, that's how.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, as Jim points out in this example from
Yeah.
the color, you see that you get that brown from the way that peach color and the green are mixing in the overprint.
Okay, thanks.
And you get that nice paper color showing through in certain areas as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's again, you're cheating by getting, you're getting those extra colors out of the paper and the mix of the inks. It's a cheater's profession.
I think that's a good way to end. I don't have any more questions unless somebody sneaks one in. That's where we just like.
I saw something just pass through in the chat.
Mhm.
I have definitely spoken to Dave Ferry about cutting Ruby Lith for lecture set. I've met Dave a few times, and he actually gave me one of the Ruby Lith originals. And I've spoken to both him and Frida Sack about what the process was like of cutting that stuff. I'm very fascinated about the process of making analog type. I've tried to talk to plenty of people about it. It's why I think that certain things are better designed for some media than others. Jim is asking quickly if there's time if I could talk about Reading. Do you mean my graduate school experience at the University of Reading?
That, and we have such impressive connections from Reading. I mean, it's got to be a good place.
Yeah. Well, so I did the master's in typeface design at the University of Reading. I was there from 2006 to 2007, which is how I really took a running leap down this rabbit hole. That's a very research-driven typeface design program, which I think makes it good for people who have this interest in history and sort of the process and how things develop out of that. But I think that certainly trained me in a bit of a sensibility that makes me ripe for diving into a place like Hamilton, where you get direct access to source material to feed into your investigation and understanding about things that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly anyone who's, everyone at Reading should come here at some point. What was great actually about studying in the UK is that there were a lot of great collections there. They were closer together than Two Rivers is to New York City for me now.
Thank you, Dan. Well, and I know us, we would talk to you all day. That's really the only reason why I'm going to wrap it up, is because otherwise we'll sit around and go through your brain all day about type, which
I have a
isn't
lunch
bad.
date with 2 friends that I have to get to.
So I want to say thank you all for joining us. It has been a wonderful day to hang out with you. And thank you, Dan, for sharing so much. I've got to kind of see what you're working on, but seeing it even more is wonderful. So thank you.
Hi, Beck. All right. Thank you all.
Yeah. I always gonna round it up because we have wonderful fans here that I get to tell you all the secret stuff that you don't know any other way. Like if you're a member, you get advanced registration for WaysGoose. If you didn't know that, I have a link over in the right-hand side. You can become a member because registration for WaysGoose is going to open July 15th. And the event happens this year, November 5th and 6th. And it's going to be an online virtual conference, so it can get to all over the world. But if you're a member, you can sign up July 9th. So you should definitely become a member because you get early registration. And the new thing we've never done before is we have early bird registration at WaysGoose this year. So that means you can get the awesome pack. You can get total WaysGoose access for just $100. And the pack is great. We're working on all the goodies that go into it now. So we'll have more information about it. Right now it's secret. So if you become a member, we'll tell you right when registration opens and you'll be the first to get it. Also, we have 5 workshops leading up to WaysGoose and those fill. So if you have first registration, it means you can grab one of those spots. So we're working on that detail and you'll see information in your email. So it also, by becoming a member, we are a 501c3 and you help these weekly programs happen. So thank you. I know lots of you are members and we appreciate the support. I will also say we have online workshops. I don't know if you have all been following David Wolski on Instagram this week, but him and his students are making awesome work at Penland.
Oh,
and
it's been amazing.
Right?
I know. I wish I was there. But can you do a week or 2 at Hamilton with them?
Ooh, well, not yet, but Mary, thanks for that volley. You can do a couple-hour workshop with him. So at July 24th, we're doing an online workshop. So you can be in the comfort of your own home and learn how David Wolski does his isotype, which it feels like you get secrets, right? If you get to take that workshop, because His isotype method is a masking method for using wood type. So you can use very specific portions. So if you like abstracting wood type, it's a really great workshop. I've got to see him present on it before and I was rapt. So that is coming up on July 24th. And we've got a couple other workshops, both in-house. So if you do make your way to Two Rivers, Jim Moran will be your instructor for those. It's a ways off, but I am going to mention Jim is pulling pieces from the Globe collection and from the Inquirer collection. We have never, ever, ever pulled type from the Inquirer collection for a workshop. So if you're interested in that, make plans now. And my last big thing is we do have upcoming ham hang. So again, next week, July 9th has been canceled with Nick Loring. We're not going to have one at all. So take a break, put your feet up, and we will see you after that. And I'm really excited because on July 16th, we're going to be in New York for the Poster House. Angela Lippert is going to show off a curatorial tour of Poster House's latest exhibition, which is Julius Klinger, Posterns for a Modern Age. It's going to be amazing. So we will see you on July 16th. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and we'll talk soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, you guys. It was great. Bye, everyone. Happy 4th.